individuals been where I've been aren't supposed to be sitting here. Let me explain. There were a couple tough weeks in my past. Quite a few years ago, but who's really counting? I was deep in psychotherapy, doing what I could to recover from an emotional breakdown, yeah. I like to think there's a joke here, but really there isn't. The process involved a lot of medication. And when my doctor took a month-long vacation to Japan, I reacted badly. I took the whole lot and flushed it down the toilet. Bad move. It was a terrible shock to my system. You just can't do that kind of thing. These drugs are terribly, terribly powerful and can only be safely increased or decreased with the direct assistance of a professional. You abruptly halt 6 of them, you punch a ticket to a hospital. Generally one where they lock the door from the outside. In my case, that trip began with me collapsing to the ground in Central Park. The circuits went down and I just kind of froze up. I collapsed on a grassy lawn near the women's skating rink and stopped moving, yeah. Fortunately, 2 competent and compassionate employees of the New York City Fire Department Ambulance Corps were good enough to pick me up and drive me to the emergency room of what was then the St. Luke's Hospital, not far off on West 57th Street. It was there things got interesting. They didn't want to let me go. My father, may he rest in peace, stepped up and selected the foremost psychiatric hospital in the city of New York, the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Hospital, affiliated with the Cornell Medical Center. It was there I was driven, again in the back of an ambulance, without a siren on, my older sister beside me for moral support. The intake process went true to form for a guy in my condition. They had no trouble admitting me. I looked the part. There was just one problem here. I really wasn't psychotic, nor had I ever had any inclination to hurt myself or another person. These were the types of things the nurses repeatedly attempted to ascertain, and I could only give them a befuddled negative. No, I wasn't hearing voices, and no, I had never wanted to hurt myself. These answers didn't make anybody happy. I was just a very mixed up, neurotic schmuck who had flushed all his medication down the toilet. I settled in, or made my best effort. From the beginning, it wasn't all easy. For one thing, there was the reality that at periodic intervals during the night, one of the nurses would walk down the hall and point a flashlight through the small glass window in the bedroom door. It could have been the drugs, which had in no way been set to rights, but this rubbed me the wrong way. And there was the ever-present reality that we were strongly discouraged from exiting the premises. I never exactly pushed that envelope. I didn't try the front door. Not until I was really sure I wanted to go out. But that came later. I might have stayed put. I might have continued to play by the rules, to attend the exercise classes in the gym and to eat my meals in the dining room. There were group therapy sessions that were captivating. There were compassionate nurses and other patients who did what they could to be supportive, but it was not to be. It began with what might have been considered an innocuous conversation. The young doctor who had been most directly involved in meeting with me came up to me in the hall as I was making the big turn from the dining room to the bedrooms with a request that to him might have sounded normal. He asked whether I would be willing to participate in a weekly exercise the hospital held for the further education of the staff. From what I gathered, he was asking me to appear before an assembly of the hospital's doctors and answer questions about my condition. You might learn something about yourself, he offered. I made no immediate response. Yet I suspect that in at least some part of my mind, I knew I wouldn't be there when the date of that gathering came around. I had heard no discussion of my discharge. I was about to take matters into my own hands. I was dressed in my street clothes. They did permit us to sustain that level of dignity, and seated in an upholstered armchair just inside that ever-present front door. Our division of the hospital was located on the 7th floor, and I knew that just outside that door was a landing that led to the elevator. The issue here was that the door was locked. I waited, and when a delivery man came in, I slipped out behind him and caught the elevator down to the ground level. I actually don't think I'd ever been more wired in my life. There was really no way of knowing how the doctors might have reacted to this form of behavior. There was just one more obstacle between me and the great outdoors, a receptionist seated behind a large wooden desk. With skills developed through years of sneaking into the expensive seats at Yankee Stadium, I walked by her. It really is difficult to stop someone who's moving as if absolutely nothing is wrong. And despite the unbearable tension, I think I pulled that off. I was past her and back on the streets of New York. Freedom is so awfully easy to take for granted. After that period of confinement of some indeterminate length, I just never have. There just is no greater treasure than that. At least one remarkable reality is worth noting at this juncture. Through all the ups and downs and intervening hijinks, I had somehow managed to hold on to my blue and black plastic Citibank card. It wasn't a credit card exactly, but it did enable me to withdraw money from one of the Citibank cash machines strategically positioned around the city. I took a taxi to one of them, propelled by a blind impetus to move forward in one direction, and did so. A lot of money. Ithaca, New York had been a home to me, not only during the 3 successive years I'd attended Cornell University, situated in that small Finger Lake city, but during another when I wandered around the place as a student on leave or outside agitator or dropout, call it what you will. It was there I resolved to return. I made it as far as the Port Authority bus terminal. I even got on the bus. It was then the simmering paranoia came to a boil. Paranoia is a strange beast. It can grow on you that way. I sometimes think of it as a strange and grotesque plant, one you would stay away from if you could. With very little in the way of factual support, I reached certain conclusions, namely that the ticket agent had been on the lookout for me, and that he had informed the appropriate authorities of my whereabouts. That is the way things came to seem, seated in the window seat of the short line bus driving through the Lincoln Tunnel. If I got off that bus as planned in Ithaca, I would be apprehended. There was an underlying but powerful fear behind all of this. I still didn't trust my psychiatrist. A part of me still felt the drugs had been a mistake. I still wanted to stay away from him at all costs. And this state of mind was created by the very fact that I'd cut the drugs themselves. No, none of this was rational. I did what I had to do. I got off the bus at the stopover in Binghamton, and I did not get back on. Plan A had been aborted. I had nothing to replace it with. Inspiration struck. I would travel to the great Northwest for the apple picking season. From there, I would be a ski bum. After that, the possibilities remained almost endless. I still wanted to stay positive if this was in any way possible. It was a lifestyle that might have been possible or even sustainable for a guy with his head on straight. Mine was not. This did not stop me from proceeding as best I could to the Newark International Airport and buying a ticket on the People's Express airline for Oakland, California. My first choice had been for a one-way trip to Seattle, but when that plane was sold out, I altered plans. What that ticket agent might have been thinking, I will never know. Even by the standards of People's Express Airline, a very low-budget airline, very much of the 1980s, this could not have gone down easy. I was bound for Fort Bragg in Northern California. I really knew nothing about this town. It was just a place to go, to keep myself from being waylaid by any form of cult that might have been waiting to take advantage of an aimless youth. It was a place to go. I was big on destinations. The trip required an intervening stop, this time at the Oakland bus station. It was there the major turning point in this tale of adventure and mishap took place. I was seated on one side, pretty much minding my own business, when I witnessed a scene that sent me headed back in the other direction. It unfolded something like this. A young mother was seated with her son. The kid must have been about 4 or 5 years old, and he caught sight of the candy machine that made snacks available to the early morning travelers. The little boy got up and walked toward the bright colors of the machine. The mother had other ideas and quickly guided him back to his seat. The boy was not dissuaded. Again he got up and made for the sweet candy. Again his mother let him know this was not to be by escorting him back to the row of plastic seats. Another child might have let it go at that. This little boy did not. In a spirit that might have had something to do with stubbornness, he again got up and began walking across the bus station toward that darn candy machine. Well, this time the mother had just about enough. With a start, she got up from her seat, grabbed the little boy, hoisted him over one shoulder, and deposited him firmly in his seat. He moved no more. This then was the scene. As ordinary as it may seem, that had such far-reaching implications. There was something about that mother-son interaction that resonated deep within the recesses of my medication-deprived mind. What it told me was that there was still work to be done, and that, in all likelihood, that work was best conducted in the company of the very committed psychiatrist I had been trying so desperately to leave behind. I was 3,000 miles away, as alone as I had ever been. But I knew I must go back. After a brief delay at the Oakland airport, where a much-needed breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast was consumed, breakfast usually helps, I caught another flight back to New York. It wasn't all simple and direct, but I knew where I had to wind up. Suffice it to say that I spent an expensive night at the Samoritz Hotel, then on Central Park South, before, with the dawn of the new day, I called the good doctor. "How did you make it back?" he asked. I had no reply. We can pick up right where we left off, he forthrightly stated. It was later that afternoon I found myself walking south along Madison Avenue. The smell of butter wafting out of Greenberg's bakery was too much for me to resist, and I stopped in to buy a small apple pie for the doctor and I to share. I wasn't on time, but for once I didn't sweat it. Still, I couldn't help but notice the look of relief in my doctor's eyes when he took in the reality that there was no blood-stained sling on my arm. The rest he knew he could handle. I cleared out the afternoon, he said. We ate some pie. For my doctor to have canceled appointments in my honor was unheard of. These things weren't done. He cleared the floor for me to tell my story, but I wasn't interested. Maybe he knew I wouldn't be interested. It was for me to up and have at it. Self-pity never carried much weight among us. I don't know that my doctor ever heard this full account. Now you have. Freedom is a great treasure indeed. So is the memory of events such as these. Thanks for coming out.